Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Manulife Business Success Series webinar on strengthening talent through leadership. My name is Ian McLean, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our sponsors and partners. And so a special thank you to our title sponsor today, or for the series, Manulife. Our platinum sponsor of the series is Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. And to this month's presenting sponsor, Future Focus Incorporated. Thank you to Michael and his team. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and supporting businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce background noise. If you have any questions that come up through the session, you can type them into the question box in the control panel at any time. And if you have a tech-related question, just let her type a question into the question box. A representative of our team will get right back to you. If you have questions, as I say, I'll gather those through the session and try and get them to Michael throughout our presentation today. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation. It will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I'd like to now introduce my good friend for today's session, Michael Snyders. He's the president of Future Focus Incorporated. Michael is the president of Future Focus, where he has spent the last 19 years working alongside small and mid-sized organizations as an advisor, trainer, and coach in the areas of business strategy, talent development, and leadership training. Michael and his team at Future Focus launched the Leadership Effectiveness Training Program in 2019, which has impacted over 35 companies and over 250 leaders in our community, and recently launched the Family Business Leadership Effectiveness Training in collaboration with the Center for Family Business. So please join me in welcoming Michael.
Thank you very much.
The Business Success Series has been focused on talent during the month of February, with some excellent discussions on how to find and select talent, accessing talented students and graduates from our community's post-secondary institutions, and the talented newcomers to our community through Working Together, the Working Together Employment Project. So hiring the best talent is a very important part of developing a talented team. Just as important is how we lead, engage, and develop talented people within our organizations. So, Mike, I think that's the conversation we want to have today, and this has been sort of the culmination of those other sessions, which I know you listened in and participated in. So I guess, and if I miss a question, feel free to kind of add this in. I think we want this to be a dynamic when people are listening or after this session, watching it on a podcast. I want them to do the takeaways of how do they get the most out of their people, and it really is it's a evolving and dynamic situation, particularly now in the pandemic. But to get started, if you're excited, and we've just recently hired two very bright young people, so we're thrilled to have them on board. So we think we've got great candidates who are starting to work. What are some of the things you do to get a new hire really engaged and excited about their role? So they're excited to have the job, but you want them excited about the work and the what they're doing. What are some of the things that you would do to get them engaged and excited?
That's a very good question, and it's a very important question. How we onboard the first 6 months of an employment relationship are absolutely critical to the longevity and the success of that relationship. The thing that we often don't think about is what is the impact? What is the individual coming into the organization feeling at the time? It doesn't matter whether you're hiring a CEO at an executive level or whether you're hiring somebody that's coming into your shop floor. They're all coming in, as I say, feeling like nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. They're going to be worried about, I'm not productive. Everybody else knows what they're doing. I know what I'm doing for a living, but I don't know how it's done here. So everybody else knows where they're going. I don't even know where the coffee maker is. And all too often, especially in small and mid-sized organizations, we hire them, we say, here's your desk, here's your phone, or here's your equipment, now away you go. And they're kind of lost in the process a little bit. So I say the first thing is is really empathize with what they're feeling. So understand that they are going to feel nervous. They're going to feel like they're not contributing, and they're going to feel like they're unproductive. So they're going to be worried about their jobs right from the get-go. So empathize with how they're feeling. Second, what I would suggest is, and this is, I think, a really important strategy, because oftentimes we don't spend enough time because we don't have the time. So what I suggest is a paced-in learning. So if, for instance, the individual has 15 different responsibilities of their job, what I would do as the hiring manager or as the owner is identify with what are the 3 or 4 things that if they were up and functioning and capable with early on, that are going to add the most value to what I need right now. And then train them in that area and let them have a couple of weeks of really kind of working in that. They're going to feel more productive. They're going to feel like they're contributing early. They know it's important to you, and you're not overwhelming them with trying to train them on everything on their job. So now you're giving them an opportunity to focus on things that they can learn, adapt, become capable on in a relatively short amount of time. Then you move on to the next 3 or 4 things. By doing that, you're going to onboard them quicker. They're going to feel productive quicker. They're going to feel more comfortable quicker, and they're going to feel like they're bringing value to you. And you're not going to have to spend all that time.
So, I mean, early wins reinforce, get positive feelings with the new hire. The employer feels more confident that they've made the right choice, and it sort of builds and accelerates from there.
Yeah, for sure. And the concept of time on your time as the hiring manager, as the business owner, is also important. It's the time that you spend with them. You don't have to spend a lot of time with them, but you do need to. And oftentimes we don't go, and like once a week, you should be once a week, at least 20 to 30 minutes each week, and not performance driven, not about teaching, but connecting with them. So take that time to connect with them. How are you feeling? How are things going? What are some of the talents that you're bringing to the table that you want to put into action? So make them feel welcome. That time that we spend with our individual employees, and that's on an ongoing basis as well, that's time that will serve you really well in the long run. And it really connects people and engages them to your team.
I'm just jotting down notes here since I'm the CEO of 2 new hires. So I just made a couple of notes there. Forgive me. So one of the things, and this is when we do these series, a lot of our focus is in small and medium-sized business. I know that's a big chunk of your business is that small and medium-sized business type enterprise. I think there is a big difference between a medium-sized business and a small business. So many of the smaller companies, it can be difficult to provide, extensive training, to develop their employees. They're more on the, I got to hire them and get them and have them up to speed right away. I guess the real question is, for those smaller companies that may not have the same resources to do formal training, what are some of the things that you recommend for them? Because I think you want to get to that same goal, which is having them feel confident, being able to spend the time. But or maybe I've got that wrong. Is there a difference between a small and medium-sized business in terms of getting the most out of their employees as quickly as possible? Maybe that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, well, and I think, definitely smaller businesses have more of an issue with that because we don't have the budgets. Even medium-sized, most owner-managed businesses, and I know because, providing training services to organizations, it's very difficult for me as a business owner to go, this is a lot of money to come out of my, it's not like coming out of corporate coffers. This is coming out of my profitability and everything else like that. So managing training, but on-the-job training is highly effective. I would say that there's 2 steps to the approach from an individual perspective. One is we talked earlier about those check-in conversations. You should do that regularly, and again, asking how they're doing. But ask them each month, what are you most proud of doing in the last month? And ask them again, what would you like to be working on over the next month? And why is this important? So what you're going to do is you're going to start to get them to talk about what they're skilled at, what they're interested in, what they want to do, and things like that. And you can start to elevate their training and their development by focusing on what they're strong at and what they're interested in. From there, and from those conversations, you learn more about them. You learn more about what makes them tick and what will really drive the best performance out of them. And then you can start to build on their development by, so let's say, for instance, an individual says that, you know what, we keep tripping over this. I love working with Excel, and I can build an Excel spreadsheet that will really help us be more efficient with this. So there's a great stretch assignment that I could give them. So stretch assignments are a great way of being able to train an individual, to get them to in development, and you can coach them along the way. But what you're doing is you're adding a contribution to the organization because you're building a process around something that needs a process around, but you're also tapping into their skills, you're strengthening their skills, and it doesn't cost you any money. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to make you money. You can then develop, the idea is being able to really find out what people's natural strengths are and what they gravitate towards. If you can find out what they gravitate towards, they get up in the morning, they're excited about going to work, they're engaged, they're ready to go, they listen really well, and they focus on how do they develop those skills.
So having worked for large private sector company, large public sector organization, and then certainly smaller businesses and working with the chamber and running the chamber, I think that's fair. Is that sometimes the notion that there's training that you have to take without really understanding whether it's going to be of value to the employee. You say you have to do this training, and I think what I hear you saying is those conversations can tell you where there already is skills that are untapped.
Absolutely.
And if there are gaps, those may come out of those conversations to say you can be more targeted and strategic around what training someone actually does need to be able to fill the role that you have for them. Is that a fair way of looking at that?
It is. And actually, when we used to do executive search and recruiting, when we were looking at hiring individuals with our clients, I would always tell them, let the individual come in for the first 4 weeks and ask and give them a task. Come in with your eyes wide open. Look for those opportunities where we maybe aren't doing as well as what you think we could be. Look at your past experience, your past environments, and everything else that. And what would you do if you had the opportunity to change things or to develop things? What kind of projects would you think of, right? And that allow them 4 weeks to be able to do that. They're going to bring their talents. They're going to bring, because oftentimes we don't assimilate their talent and their background experience into our organization. We just kind of bring them in and say, this is the way we do things. Why not tap into that potential, right? And then you can use that to set their performance goals. So let them tell you, I could do this for our team. I could do this for our organization. I could put that process into place. I could coach people around this. Let them bring that into your organization, and you will broaden the diversity of thinking in your organization.
So I would imagine there's a fine line between having people have the sort of space to say, here's how we might want to do things differently, at the same time not necessarily saying they're coming in before they know where the coffee maker is and trying to blow up everything you've already done. So,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
but you got to give that space for that new, fresh perspective to come in and say, hey, have you thought about doing it this way, which can be an improvement.
Mm-hmm.
But it strikes me that the time is what even more than the training is the time for the new employee, but the time for either a manager or for smaller businesses, for the CEO or the founder to find the time. And that's probably as much as budgets can be a constraint, time can be a constraint for the leadership people within an organization. Why and how should leaders of that small business, when they've got to hire, find more time? So, you know, there may be a cost to it, et cetera, but how do they find that time, and why should they?
So in our training, we have a 6-month training program, and every time we introduce a concept and we talk about what are the barriers that get in the way of you doing whatever concept it is, and always number one, I don't have time. That's why I don't do it, is I don't have time. We teach some pretty obvious stuff that most people know we should be doing, but we don't do them. And that's almost always the number one reason. And so I use the old adage, a stitch in time saves nine. You've got to make the time. If you make the time to have those conversations, to coach your individuals, to deal with an issue when it arises, so that you can correct behavior or correct performance in early stages. Those things save you time in the long run. How many of us as business owners, as leaders, as managers find that, how much time do we spend firefighting, dealing with behavioral issues, dealing with employee issues, dealing with customer issues, customer complaints? How many of those things could be avoided the more capability that we coach within our teams and within our individuals? So even though we might not have the time right now, if you invest that time to spend with your team, to coach them, to corrective action when you need to develop them, you're actually going to save yourself a lot of time. So you, as the business owner, as an example, can work on the business. And that's the direction that we are going as our organization, and as we're growing so fast, is that at the same time as we're growing, I have the full intention that I do not have to do anything in my business within the next 2 years. I still will, but I will be doing the things that I want to do, the areas that I want to spend time on, the areas that I'm going to work within my strengths and add the greatest value to the business. Not the areas that I'm spending where I'm having to firefight or I'm having to do this and that. Could you imagine, as the business owner, you could put yourself into a position where you're not stressed out all the time, where you're not crushed for time, and you can do the things that you want to do best for your organization. Imagine that space that you could be in, right? And it's that time that you spend coaching and developing and correcting and onboarding that really gives you that time in the long run.
Well, and I think I hadn't thought of it that way, but in investing time in your team, whether they're, well, at all stages, spending time to develop leaders that can help either put out fires or deal with the fires or prevent them in the first place is a pretty wise investment, right? But that takes some time, more than money for training necessarily at the front end, right? And yeah, I think that's pretty important, because you know, everyone, especially in small business, your whole day is something comes up, the unexpected comes up. So it's firefighting, and having a team that can take the initiative to deal with that allows the business owner or the entrepreneur to focus on that strategic and longer term. So, but investing time in people is pretty important.
The other 50% of why that's valuable is that, and this is well proven time and time again, that the more we connect on a personal level, like connect with our team, the more that they see that they're important to us, the more that they hear us, not necessarily telling them what to do, but asking them how are they doing, and recognizing what they're doing and things like that. That time that we spend with them, that engages them in the relationship with me, the business owner, or with me, the manager, and they will go to bat for you. Because people leave bad bosses. That's the number one reason why people leave. And if you've got them engaged and you show them that they're important to you and that you're listening to them and that you've got a connection with them and that they're important to you, they will come to bat for you. They will perform at higher levels. They will be more decisive. They will be more thoughtful about what they do and how the customer experience is, and different things like that, or how the quality comes out of a product. And you will just see increases in all of those things because you've engaged them on a personal level.
So there's a question that came in the chat box, which kind of marries together with my next one, which is the suggestions for those listening in, of how to build talent within their teams, right? So we got new hires, and so there's some time on that. what the question that comes in is, how do you recommend business owners empower their potential leaders, right? You've identified that you've got a good employee, that you see some leadership in them. You want to develop that within your team, and I think that's different than sort of when they're newer. What are some of the things that are tricks or the suggestions to nurture that? And I've got some great ones on my team, and
Yep.
that you kind of say they're capable of more, or when something comes up, say they can take on more, or they want to take on more. But how do you identify that and then nurture that for existing people that are already on your team?
Yeah, no, and that's the best way. It's just like a customer that is already a customer of yours is easier to continue to build that relationship than it is to get a new customer. And that's the same thing for talent internally. So, and I would say that there's two suggestions that I would give around that. One is behavioral. The other one is systemic. So from a behavioral perspective, us as leaders and managers and business owners do recognize where that high potential talent is in our organizations. Sometimes we don't do the right things to engage them and develop them. You take your star performer as an example, and if I hand something off to that individual, they're going to get it done. I know that they're going to get it done right. I know when I hand it off, I don't have to worry about it or anything else like that. But what happens is, so we think we're recognizing them by doing that. But you got to think about what the perception is of the individual. The individual could be going, I keep performing really well and I keep going fully engaged and everything else like that, but I keep getting all of the shit assignments, or I keep getting everything dropped onto my lap. And so now I'm being overwhelmed. So it's not necessarily the best way of being able to recognize. So recognize your talent that you have within your team. Spend time on a regular basis to identify with where's my hidden potential, where's my high potential, and what am I doing, what conversations am I making, what kind of coaching and mentoring am I giving them, and how am I showing them that I want to progress them in the organization according to what they want, as well as what we can benefit from as an organization. So have a conversation around what you want to do with them to progress them. So that's the behavioral side. The other side is systemic. Every organization, whether they're small or large, should take some time when they're doing their annual business planning. They should take the time to look at the potential of their teams. And there's a pretty simple strategy that's called the 9 box. And it's essentially being able to put your individual team members into identifying where they are on performance and where they are on progression. And so what you can identify with is where they're at in that matrix, and then identify 1 or 2 things that you want to do over the next year to progress them to being that star player. So you want to look at so they might be a new person coming on, but they've got a lot of potential. So how do I progress them so that they're higher performing and I'm optimizing that potential that I already see in them? Whereas you might have somebody that's a really great performer, but you may be limited in and where you see their potential going. So how do I move them up on the potential scale a little bit? What do I suggest to them in their development plan? So make it intentional that you want to move all of your high potentials through that grid to higher and higher. And you're not going to get everybody to the star performer status, but you're going to get them to the best place that they can be.
So that's interesting, because I think that's probably fair, is that we can all usually identify who the high potential or the ones that are high performers. But if I hear you correctly, I mean, just dumping more work on them, or the crappy assignments because no one else will do them, and you know that person will get it done, is not the way to reinforce the behavior that you want. Is yes, they may do some of those projects, but spending the time to have that conversation about how they can move and where you see them moving in the organization. I mean, that's the carrot. I mean, the carrot is you're either paying overtime or salary bump. But for a lot of employees, and I guess this is part of that question, is it's not necessarily about money anymore. It's about the quality of life, or the satisfaction they get from the work.
More and
Is
more
that
so with your millennial generations and like your newer generations, like millennial, Gen Z, is really about how it's balance in life. It's also around how can I develop, how will I grow as a person and in my career from working within this organization, working with this leader and things like that. They are so much more important in terms of motivators nowadays. And I just wanted to mention around the converse aspect around recognizing where our high potentials are, but there's the converse side of that where you also got to recognize those ones that are affecting your organization or your team negatively as well. And what are you doing about them? Because oftentimes we don't deal with either end of the scale as well as we should. You have those individuals that maybe are underperforming or have impacts that are on the team that are negative and different things like that. And we typically avoid those types of situations. We avoid those conversations, or we avoid actively getting involved with how do we progress this individual or try to progress this individual, or sometimes having to make that hard decision. The impact of that, not only is there an impact on your organization, your productivity, your customer relationships and everything else like that, but there's an impact even more so on the talent within your team, because the talent within your team get frustrated that you haven't done anything about it, that you haven't had that conversation. They don't need to know that you're having conversations with them, and they shouldn't for that matter. But they do need to know that either this individual is progressing and so they can see that something's happening, or that you're taking decisive action when you need to. And dealing with that is as important as dealing with where your high potentials are going.
okay? And I guess this is the point when I can't believe we've really gone this far without talking about the pandemic and how it's changed everything. But for many of our,
It's kind of comforting for a little bit.
yeah, many of our businesses, in fact, just about every business will have been impacted in some way. And in many cases, keeping employees engaged when a great number of them will be working remotely. So how do we kind of reinforce, and we've talked about it in some of these earlier questions, but how do we keep employees engaged with the company in terms of culture and sort of the connection with the workplace when we're working remotely? I know, in our case, we have 2 or 3 times a week where everyone's on a Zoom call, or I guess we use Microsoft Teams, but and some of it's to kind of go over general work things, but it's how people are doing, our outreach to our members. So we try and actively ensure that we've got 2 or 3 windows a week when we're all together and have some of those conversations. But it's tough, right? I mean, you're limited in the things that you can do, or at least from our perspective. What are some of the things that you do, either in groups or individually? Like, how do we stay connected to our employees so they understand the culture of the organization doesn't really change, but the how we sort of communicate that and how we express that is obviously different because we're not together and we're doing things differently.
Yeah. And I think again, those check-in conversations become even more important during a pandemic and during where we're working remote. My team we were working remote, and like people could work in our office or they can work from home even before the pandemic. So our transition was relatively easy. But it did make a point that I needed to at least once a week do it, like just touch base with every person that is in my team with nothing to do with work. Just how are you doing? How are you coping? Is there anything that you need? And just joking around or just connecting with them and everything else like that. And then checking in with each individual, or having my leaders check in with their individuals to go, so how, and this is more kind of performance related, or what they're working on, just going, so how are you finding working on that particular project, or do you need anything? Where are you at with your project and everything else like that, or where are you at with this? And so connecting on that level as well. But the more we connect with each other, the better, and it's more important. one of the things that I did, and relatively early on, and it worked really, really well, was I went to Little Mushroom Catering, which is this fantastic catering, one of our members, I think, in the chamber as well, and asked them if they would make me up some catered meals and everything else that like that. I went and picked them up, and I didn't tell my staff that I was doing this, and I drove around to all of their houses and went to their front porch, brought some meals with them, knocked on the, played the Nicky Nicky Nine door, and stood back and had a 5-10 minute conversation with them, and just like, here, I miss you, and I miss having you guys in the office, so I just thought I'd come around, and just something like that, where it doesn't need to cost a lot of money. Took me a little bit of time, took me 3 or 4 hours to drive around to everybody's place and everything else like that. But I think that thoughtfulness and that connection, that when everybody is so isolated all the time, and that's one of the biggest things, I think, from a mental health perspective, is that lack of connectivity that we're feeling, and that lack of being sociably connected, whether it be within our companies or whether it be within life in general. So being really, really cognizant of those, that not just mental health, but just how are people feeling, right? So.
But and I guess that's just part of it, is you can't kind of fake leadership, right? If the leader, people watch what the leader does. So I mean, I think we're to some extent we're all. I mean, I think we're all tired of the pandemic. We all want it to be over. But how we respond to our teams is pretty important. How we try and take care of each other, and I think that comes back to, and it seems to be a common theme. Time is probably the most important thing. Like spending time, being thoughtful about interacting with your team, whether they're new or whether they're an emerging leader or your senior group, who sometimes I guess we take advantage or take for granted. But those sorts of things, and I guess you say for small business, doesn't have to involve a lot of money necessarily. It's about meaningful, authentic connection with your team.
And it doesn't have to be a lot of time either. It's just thoughtful time, and it's making the point of doing it. And usually we use the excuse that we don't have the time. That's oftentimes what we hear. But part of it is that we haven't really, when you're working at, or when you're at the gym, you create muscle memory, right? The more you do something, the more you're creating muscle memory, and and it's the same thing in our practices as leaders, and in the habits that we form, is that, do we create muscle memory around this? And that's really the key. Is so my advice is actually put it in your schedule. You might not have it in your schedule that's connected to the other individual to say, I'm going to call them on Mondays at 9:15 or whatever, but you're going to, if you block off that time in your schedule and say, for every Monday for the first 4 hours is my connection time. So you're reminded, because to be honest, we just get busy doing other things. We get busy with our tasks, we get busy with our to-do list, we get busy with our strategies, we get busy with our firefighting, and we tend to go, I'll get to that later.
Mm-hmm.
Block it off as if it's a really important client meeting in your schedule. So what it does is it creates that muscle memory that I'm going to regularly connect, regularly have those conversations, regularly touch base, nothing to do with work. Well, maybe a little bit to do with work, but don't drive performance through it. Make it about connecting with other people, and your engagement levels will skyrocket.
And I think that is, I mean, that's the other part is, and we talked about this a little earlier, is those connections that isn't related to, here's the next job we have to do, but is about how they're feeling, and how, because I think we almost have to be more intentional about that now, because while this is great to see you, Michael, it's not, it's two-dimensional, and you don't, body language is harder to read, and facial expressions and people's willingness to be as open as they might be in person are compromised by the technology, even though the technology is great. So spending a bit more time, and as you say, wise or engaged time is pretty important. Okay, Here's one, and again, this is related to the pandemic. I think for many businesses, they would say, "Hey, look, we've been hit hard. The company, big, small, or medium, or in between,
Mhm.
have been hit hard by the pandemic. What can we do to retain and engage our team when they're feeling afraid for their own job?" I mean, that's got to be going through many workers saying, "Geez, I'm lucky to still have my job." And there's an anxiety that goes on with when you're seeing nothing but bad news on economic news, job closures or layoffs in some of the bigger companies, and it's been a very difficult time. Those anxieties are going to be with your own team, even if rationally it may not come true. I mean, it's got to be kind of percolating in the back of many workers' minds. What can you do to sort of support or reinforce the sense of security for your own team?
Yeah, and this pandemic, from a business perspective, businesses fall into one of three pockets. I think every organization falls into one of three pockets. Either you're an essential service, or you've learned how to pivot really well, where you've just gone off the charts busy, and that needs to be managed, and that needs to be managed in a special way as well. And that creates stress within your team. Trust me, we're going through that right now, and my team certainly feels the stress of all the transition that we've done, and then how that's grown since then. And then you've got ones that, it's business as usual for the most part, might have lost maybe 10% in revenue or something like that, but it's manageable and you can get through it. But it changes the organization and how we do things. And then the third aspect then is ones that got really hit hard. Like I feel so bad for those that are, for gyms and for some personal service organizations and for restaurants and venues like that, hospitality industry, because there's not a lot you can do. There's some creative things, and that's one of the things I would say is that be really creative with how do you create, I call it tragic optimism. Look at how do I deal with the reality, the current reality, but also how do I look beyond the current reality, and how can I shift? The best opportunity in a situation, the one thing that comes out of this in all three of those buckets is that everything is brought back to a level of essential change. Organizations have a difficult time changing. Individuals have a difficult time changing. So if you try to bring in a new ERP system as an example, everybody's going to buck against that new ERP system. I like how I do things now. I'm good at how I do things now. It's easy how I do things now because I know it. This is the known factor. And now you want me to move over to here. We are now, all of us as organizations, in this state of change that there's no avoidance of it. So this is the best opportunity to look for how do we change right? How do we move forward in a better way? And I would be tapping into my team, and thankfully for some of the different support systems that we have through the different levels of government, and that the chamber does a fantastic job of communicating this out on a regular basis to all of us as business owners and community leaders. Is that we have wage subsidies and different things like that that help us to support this transition. Go to your team, involve them in what do we do differently, come up with creative ideas. How do we move forward together? And we want to survive this, and we want to thrive through this. So involve them in that process, bring their creative ideas forward, recognize that they are going through change regardless. And change is difficult and change is frustrating. So recognizing that, but this is the best opportunity to do that. And continue again and focus on the mental health. Mental health is so important right now, and it's really, like I used to sit on the board of directors for the Community Counseling Services, so I'm a very strong proponent towards mental health in our community. This has become much more prevalent in our society and accepted in our society over the last 10-15 years, which is wonderful to see. Even more so in the last year, where people are really realizing that there doesn't need to be a stigma to that. But we as leaders need to recognize that we don't need to be counselors or therapists or anything else like that. we need to just recognize that people are experiencing feelings and emotions and mental strain and stress and everything, and we really just need to connect, communicate. But the more you engage them with the direction you want to go and with some of the exciting things that we could be doing or that we want to be doing, engage them in the decision-making process and then help them to be successful in bringing them forward.
I think that's important is recognizing and being authentic about the fact that we all have some anxiety is a good first step. But
And be vulnerable about that as well. Like that's the one thing that with mental health is that we oftentimes we don't talk about it. We don't, because it's the fear of being vulnerable. I personally suffer from panic and anxiety attacks speaking in front of groups. It's something I have struggled with for 20 years, but it's what I do for a living, right? So but part of the reason why I can do what I can do that is because I face that fear and because I communicate about it and because I feel it's okay to be vulnerable around it.
But I think communicating that change, which I think you're right, is individuals and organizations left to their own devices shy away from it because you do what you know how to do.
Yeah.
But talking about that essential change is probably in this coming out of the pandemic of saying, look, it's hit our company hard. We have to change, and then, but having that ability to have the conversation, saying we all need to be part of what the new normal looks like, and I think that's one of the things that, frankly, our chambers were going through and looking at next year's budget and how we do things, and everything we've done is in a lot of ways is different than it used to be 12 months ago. We're not doing in-person events. We've had to transition in just about everything, and it hasn't been me telling the chamber staff what to do. It's like,
awesome.
Okay, folks, how do we do this? Like, I don't know technology, so it's been saying, and the team, and giving them that space to say, give me some ideas, like how are we going to do events and continue to engage people and let people do networking. And it's come from the staff. So I think that's right, of saying that essential change, we have to do it. What are the menu of options? And it came from engaging the great staff that I have, because none of the ideas that we've used have been mine. I can just assure you of that. There's
Ian, if you ever looking for a side gig, you can come and start facilitating some of our leadership training.
There you go.
Because like you actually, and I'm quite serious about that, but I say that because you just demonstrated some really key things. One is recognize the talent and let them know that you recognize the talent. Two, ask them. Mm-hmm. Bring them in. The more you bring them into decision making, the more you bring them into, okay, how do we do this? And let them come up with the solutions and how, and certainly bring it to me to show me, what your plan is and everything else that, and I'll tweak, or I'll give you some advice and different things like that. But the more you do that, the more you're giving them ownership in their roles and in a piece of the organization in so many different ways. But then you also touched on a final one as well, is you're showing that servant leadership, Ian, you personally, by being able to say, I didn't do this.
Yeah.
It's the team that did this. It's like, if it was, they make me look good, right? It's because of their skills, it's because of their talent, it's because of their engagement. And you know what? I might be good at being able to pull that out of them, but that's all I'm good at. My team is the one that really kind of takes, and you demonstrated that. So I just wanted to.
Well, I know my limitations, and while I'm not, I still have, like you, I know anyone who says that they're eager to get in front of big groups and do that is, it's a learned skill, but it's one that a lot of my team would not want to do. So that's the part that I can play. They're the talent, and I think, but every good organization, successful organization I've been with, big or small, private sector, public sector, the teams I've been with, that's been a common thread, is that it's not top-down leadership, and top-down leadership just does not work anymore. It's just not something that the new generation, and it's just not something that that is going to work anymore. Listen, and I guess that leads maybe to we've got a couple of minutes left. I think there's a real focus on having a more diverse workforce, of having a balance and a blend of what the community looks like and what the region and the province, the country looks like. How do we enhance the culture to be more welcoming to more diverse workforce? And so that could be, how do we make sure we have a pool of candidates when we're hiring new folks that would say that we go out of, and I think this is like the previous question, we get stuck into saying change is not something that we're open to, and it's not, I don't think it's intentional, it's just the way we are. But when we look to how do we diversify what we look like, gender balance, diversity, ethnicity, what are the things we need to do so that we are open to a more diverse workforce? And if there's specific things around, you did search before, I don't think that's your focus anymore, but what are the things that we do to have a more diverse pool? Because that's the starting point of even having people to choose from. But what are the things that we should be focusing on in terms of hiring and how to hire, so that we can move to all of us having more diverse workforces that reflect our community as they are?
And that it is become more and more front and center stage. It should have a long time ago, I think. But part of it is making sure that your organization is ready for a diverse workforce, and the idea behind that, and it doesn't matter how big or how small you are. And the first is training leaders and everybody within your organization, not from a policies and procedures perspective, not from a here's what our diversity and inclusion policies are, or our approach or anything else like that, but from an understand that everybody that's coming from, doesn't matter what background they're coming from, doesn't matter where they're coming from and everything else like that, whether they're men, women, or whether it's generational, whether it's different cultures, is that everybody brings a different perspective, everybody brings a different set of strengths and what strengthens them. What I would do is, when I'm building out my team, is first off, have a very well identified values system. So what are the values that we espouse within our culture? So that then becomes the foundation for who you hire. So that is where you look for the commonality. Is, in ours, we have 5 values that I live my life by, and that's translated into our business. So I look for those values in anybody that's coming into our organization, regardless of background. From there, though, it's recognizing the talent that comes from the diversity, recognizing that different people are going to come with different things that strengthen them. And that mosaic is what will create a well-balanced, diverse skill set that rounds out our team. So really making that part of your education with your leaders and with the rest of your employees is that we all come from the same foundation of values. We all want the same things. We all want to respect each other with the same level. We all want, whatever your values are as an organization, but we celebrate all of the diverse skill set. And that's where the diversity comes from. It's not, do we have, X number of people from this area of the population or this area. It's recognizing that everybody within all of our population brings great talent, and that talent is so it's understanding the humanistic side of diversity and inclusion. I think is where training needs to happen. From a hiring perspective, and we don't do a lot of. We had some really great talented people talk about diversity and hiring and things like that as well in our previous sessions. But is, again, when I'm hiring, I would be looking for, do they fit within the value system of the organization? Do they fit within that foundational aspect? But then, like, we've got people we've hired from the Conestoga College program. We have 2 people from India that we hired through that program. That are absolutely exceptional parts of our team. We've hired remotely, so we've hired from out of country, so we have remote workers that work with us, and we have a wonderful blend of men and women in our organization. And intentionally, I want to have a blend in the classroom with our facilitators, because each one of our facilitators brings a different bend to the program and to I need those younger generation leaders that have been there, done that, but they're connecting better with our millennials and different things like that. So that diversity brings strength to your organization, and it's that it's that humanistic side of training within your organization that's very important, I think. So.
Well, and I think that's a good place to leave that. But the chamber's a new diversity and inclusion committee, and part of that is to have developed those sort of tools and things that we should be doing so businesses can take not only the training side but the hiring side. What are the ways to make sure you have a more diverse pool that you're drawing from, so that we can reflect that. Listen, I think we're going to.
That systemic part is still important as well. So understand what is our policies and procedures around diversity and inclusion, and what are the tools available to us, and how can we tap into the chamber's work and everything else like that is all definitely important as well. I would say on top of that is the humanistic side of it.
Excellent. Listen, thank you, Michael, for joining us today and providing or having such a great conversation. I think very worthwhile for those listening and certainly those that are going to be watching on the podcast. That does bring us to the end of today's session. So I want to thank again our title sponsor for the Business Success Series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor of the series, Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region. This month's presenting sponsor, of course, Future Focus Incorporated, Michael, and today's speaker, Michael Snyders. Finally, to all of you for joining us today, as a reminder, we do host a new Business Success Series session every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Join us next week for the future of work with our what our current and future workforce thinks. We will sit down with Charlene Hoffbauer, Executive Director of the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin, who undertook a preliminary research into what the current and future workforce is thinking and what that might mean for your business. It's a fascinating study. Hope you'll join us then. For full details and to register for this free event, visit greaterkwchamber.com. Please do share this series with your friends and colleagues, and join us every Wednesday afternoon for the next edition of the Greater KW Chamber's Business Success Series. Because if it's Wednesday, it's the Business Success Series. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you very much. Take care.